Marcus Thorne adjusted his cravat in the gleaming surface of the elevator as it ascended through the celestial spire. As New Terra's most influential food critic, he'd dined at countless establishments across 17 star systems, but the astral plate was different. The restaurant had appeared suddenly 6 months ago, becoming the most exclusive dining destination in the Orion Arm virtually overnight. The elevator doors parted to reveal an entrance hall that seemed to defy physics, with floating crystals casting prismatic light across walls that shimmered like the surface of a soap bubble. A host materialized beside him, a Viridian, their translucent skin gleaming with bioluminescent patterns. "Welcome to the astral plate, Mr. Thorne. We've been expecting you." Marcus hadn't made a reservation under his real name, but he wasn't surprised they'd identified him. His reviews could make or break even the most established restaurants. What did surprise him was the slight tremor in the host's voice. Was that fear? The dining room was a masterpiece of xenoarchitectural design. Tables floated on gravity platforms, each surrounded by privacy fields that shimmered like aurora borealis. The other diners were a mix of species, wealthy merchants, corporate executives, and what he strongly suspected were crime lords, all drawn by rumors of dishes that defied description. "Your usual preferences have been noted," the host said, guiding him to a private booth overlooking the city's endless spires. Chef Vaxthal was quite specific about preparing something special for you. Marcus settled into his seat, noting how the privacy field adjusted automatically to his height. "I'll trust the chef's recommendation then. Though I do have a preference for rare preparations." The host's bioluminescent patterns flickered in what might have been amusement. "Oh, we specialize in rare offerings, Mr. Thorne. Very rare indeed." As he waited, Marcus observed his fellow diners with professional interest. A Centaurian merchant was consuming what appeared to be living crystals that chimed melodiously as they were devoured. A group of Arcturian executives shared a dish that floated above their table, occasionally changing colors and geometric configurations. Something felt off, though. The other critics he'd spoken with had raved about the astral plate's offerings, but their reviews had been strangely vague about specific dishes. And there was an undercurrent of tension among the staff that his trained eye couldn't miss. His musings were interrupted by the arrival of what he assumed was his first course, a sphere of what looked like suspended liquid, containing something that shifted and swirled with hypnotic patterns. "Our amuse-bouche," the server announced, "memory pearls from the dreams of a dying star." Marcus had just raised the sphere to his lips when a commotion erupted from the kitchen. A figure burst through the doors, humanoid, female, with skin that seemed to shimmer between shades of opal. She was wearing what appeared to be ceremonial robes, but they were torn and stained. Her eyes met his across the room, wide with terror. Security drones materialized instantly, attempting to contain her, but she was surprisingly agile. She vaulted over a floating table, scattering plates of exotic delicacies. "They're eating us," she screamed in perfect universal standard. "The rare dishes, they're people." The privacy field around Marcus's booth suddenly solidified, becoming opaque. The host's voice came through the restaurant's audio system, smooth and unruffled. "Our sincere apologies for the disruption, Mr. Thorne. Simply a malfunction in one of our synthetic entertainment programs. Your special order will arrive momentarily." But Marcus had seen enough to know something was terribly wrong. The fear in that woman's eyes had been very real. And now that he thought about it, hadn't there been rumors? Whispers about dishes that could only be ordered with special passwords, about private rooms where the truly wealthy could experience ultimate delicacies? The privacy field dissolved, revealing a new dish being placed before him. The plate was a single piece of black crystal that seemed to absorb light. And on it, Marcus felt his blood freeze. The dish was clearly sentient, a small, humanoid figure with crystalline skin that caught the light like diamonds. It was curled into a fetal position, but he could see it breathing. Beside it was an array of exotic utensils that left no doubt about the intended purpose. Your rare order, Mr. Thorne, the server said smoothly. A juvenile crystal singer from the Lyra cluster. Their kind can regenerate lost limbs, ensuring maximum freshness between courses. Chef Vaxthal suggests starting with the appendages to fully appreciate the melodic resonance of their crystalline structure. Marcus forced himself to maintain his composed demeanor, even as his mind raced. He was no stranger to unusual alien cuisines, but this was something else entirely. This was slavery and murder disguised as haute cuisine. The figure on his plate shifted slightly, and he caught a glimpse of eyes that held intelligence and terror. They needed his help, but a wrong move now would only get them both killed. He could see security drones hovering at the periphery of his vision, their weapon systems humming quietly. A remarkable presentation, he said carefully, buying time to think. But before we begin, I simply must know more about the preparation process. Professional curiosity, you understand. My readers are always fascinated by the behind-the-scenes details. The server's expression shifted subtly. We maintain absolute discretion regarding our preparation methods, Mr. Thorne. Though for someone of your influence, perhaps a kitchen tour could be arranged, after your meal. Marcus picked up one of the utensils, making a show of examining its elaborate construction. His mind was already racing through possibilities. He had certain security contingencies in place, no successful critic survived long without them. But he'd need a distraction first. He set down the utensil with deliberate care. Actually, I believe I will take that kitchen tour now. My readers especially enjoy when I can describe the full context of a dish before consuming it. Adds to the narrative, you understand. The server hesitated, patterns of light flowing across their translucent skin in what Marcus recognized as a sign of agitation. Sir, protocol requires. Protocol? Marcus allowed just a hint of his considerable influence to color his tone. I was under the impression that the astral plate prided itself on catering to its distinguished guests' every whim. Perhaps I've been misinformed about the establishment standards? It was a calculated risk, playing on their desire to maintain their prestigious reputation. For a moment, he thought he'd overplayed his hand. Then the server's expression shifted to one of careful deference. Of course, Mr. Thorne. If you'll follow me. As he stood, Marcus made a show of adjusting his cravat, triggering the emergency beacon hidden within. Help would come, but he'd have to keep everyone alive until it arrived. Starting with the terrified being on his plate, who was watching him with desperate hope in their crystalline eyes. He had reviewed thousands of restaurants across the galaxy, but this would be his most important critique yet. And for the first time, he intended to make sure this establishment never served another meal again. The kitchen of the astral plate was a study in controlled chaos. Banks of quantum stoves hummed at frequencies that made Marcus's teeth itch, while anti-gravity prep stations hosted elaborate culinary sculptures that defied both physics and ethics. But it was the sealed doors at the back that drew his attention, heavy security barriers marked with warning glyphs in a dozen languages. Our preservation chambers, the server explained, noticing his interest. Only authorized personnel beyond this point. Marcus maintained his professional demeanor, though his stomach churned. Fascinating. In my experience, the finest establishments have nothing to hide from their discerning clientele. Transparency builds trust, wouldn't you agree? A new voice joined their conversation, smooth as aged brandy but with an undertone of poison. Indeed it does, Mr. Thorne. Which is why I'm delighted to give you our full tour. Chef Vaxthal emerged from a shimmer of transported light, a Thessalian, their crystalline exoskeleton refracting the kitchen's lights into mesmerizing patterns. 6 articulated arms moved in perfect coordination as they prepared what appeared to be a garnish, though Marcus noted how each appendage could easily serve as a weapon. Your reputation precedes you, Vaxthal continued. Your review of the Jovian ice wines last season was particularly incisive. Marcus inclined his head, buying time. His emergency beacon was still active, but help could be systems away. He needed to keep them talking. "You honor me, Chef. I'm particularly interested in your sourcing methods. These rare ingredients must be quite challenging to procure. Quality requires dedication." Vaxthal gestured to one of the sealed doors, which Iris opened with a soft hiss. "Please, allow me to show you our selection process." As they walked, Marcus observed everything with his critic's trained eye. The kitchen staff, a mix of organic and synthetic beings, moved with military precision. What he'd initially taken for preparation stations now revealed themselves as containment cells, their force fields humming with suppression frequencies. The preservation chamber was worse than he'd imagined. Rows of stasis pods lined the walls, each containing a sentient being in suspended animation. Some he recognized, crystal singers, ethereals, even a few species he'd thought extinct. All considered delicacies by those wealthy enough to indulge in forbidden tastes. "Impressive, isn't it?" Vaxthal's crystalline form sparkled with pride. "We work with only the finest suppliers. The syndicate ensures quality control." "The syndicate?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, though he'd suspected their involvement. The criminal organization had its tentacles in everything from spice trading to weapons smuggling. "I wasn't aware they'd entered the culinary market. Diversification is key to success." Vaxthal moved to a control panel, their fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "Though I must admit, Mr. Thorne, your sudden interest in our operations is concerning." Marcus felt the subtle shift in air pressure as security fields activated around them. "Merely professional thoroughness. My readers expect detailed coverage." "Your readers," Vaxthal's voice hardened, "won't be reading anything about this establishment. We've invested too much to allow exposure now. Though perhaps." They studied Marcus with calculating eyes. "Your palate could be an asset to our operation. There are always new acquisitions to evaluate." A stasis pod hummed to life, revealing the opalescent woman who'd tried to escape earlier. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with terror as she recognized her surroundings. "Consider this a test of your commitment," Vaxthal said. "Help us refine our menu, and you'll enjoy privileges beyond imagination." "Refuse." The chef's crystalline form pulsed with dangerous light. Marcus stepped closer to the pod, mind racing. The woman's eyes met his, pleading. He could see others stirring in their pods, dozens of lives hanging in the balance. His hidden beacon felt heavy against his chest, but would help arrive in time. "An intriguing proposal," he said carefully. "Though I do have one small suggestion regarding your presentation methods." "Oh?" Vaxthal leaned forward, interested. Marcus moved with the speed that had kept him alive through years of reviewing establishments in the galaxy's most dangerous sectors. His hand shot to his cravat, triggering not just the beacon but the EMP device woven into its fabric. The security fields flickered and died. Stasis pods began cycling into emergency release mode. Chaos erupted as disoriented captives emerged into the suddenly darkened chamber. "Run!" Marcus shouted, slamming his elbow into the crystal fragments that served as Vaxthal's equivalent of a solar plexus. The chef staggered back, their perfect coordination disrupted. The opalescent woman needed no encouragement. She was already moving, helping others from their pods. But Vaxthal was recovering quickly, their crystalline form beginning to pulse with dangerous energy. "Security breach in Preservation Chamber 3. The chef's voice boomed through the facility's comm system. "Contain all inventory immediately." Marcus grabbed a fallen prep tool, something meant for carving delicate garnishes that would serve equally well for self-defense. "I don't suppose," he called to the opalescent woman, "you know another way out of here?" She flashed him a fierce grin, her skin rippling with colors. "The waste reclamation tubes. If we can reach them. Lead the way." Marcus positioned himself between the escapees and the advancing security drones. I believe this establishment is about to receive its first negative review in quite some time. The next few minutes were chaos. They fought their way through the kitchen, Marcus using his knowledge of restaurant layouts to anticipate guard positions. The opalescent woman, who introduced herself as Lenara between dodging energy blasts, proved remarkably capable at improvising weapons from kitchen equipment. They reached the reclamation tubes just as reinforcements arrived. Lenara helped the last of the escapees into the tubes while Marcus held their pursuers at bay with a stolen pulse rifle. "Your review won't matter," Vaxthal's voice echoed through the chamber. "We own the critics, the media, the authorities. No one will believe you." Marcus smiled grimly as distant sirens began to wail. "Perhaps. But I took the liberty of broadcasting our entire tour to my emergency contacts, including several competing criminal organizations who might be interested in your client list." The look of horror that crystallized across Vaxthal's features was almost worth the price of admission. "Time to go." Lenara grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the last open tube. "Unless you'd prefer to stay for dessert?" They plunged into the darkness of the reclamation system, leaving chaos in their wake. But Marcus knew this was far from over. The syndicate wouldn't let such a profitable operation go without a fight. And he had a feeling his next review was going to be his most dangerous yet. The waste reclamation tunnels of New Terra's upper city were never meant for desperate escapes. Marcus splashed through processed water, his expensive evening wear ruined, following Lenara's opalescent form as she guided their group through the labyrinth of maintenance passages. Behind them, security drones scanning beams pierced the darkness. "You do this often?" Marcus asked, helping a young crystal singer over a particularly treacherous section. The child's crystalline form chimed softly with each movement, a haunting melody of fear and hope. Lenara's skin rippled with patterns that might have been amusement. Escape from high-end restaurants that serve sentient beings? This would be a first. She paused at an intersection, her natural bioluminescence providing just enough light to navigate by. "Though I did once have to flee a rather aggressive suitor through the sewers of Proxima 3. A blast of energy scorched the wall near them, cutting short any response Marcus might have made. The security drones were getting closer. They had 23 rescued beings with them, many weakened from their time in stasis, and the group's pace was slowing. "We need a diversion," Marcus muttered, his critic's mind analyzing the situation like a complex dish requiring deconstruction. "These tunnels connect to every major building in the sector, correct?" Lenara nodded, her eyes widening as she caught his meaning. "The pressure regulation systems. If we can access a control panel, we could give our pursuers a rather unpleasant cleansing," Marcus finished. He turned to the group. "Anyone here familiar with New Terra's waste management protocols?" A tentacled being that had been introduced as Engineer Pix raised an appendage. Their voice bubbled through a translator, "Worked maintenance before they acquired me. Give me 3 minutes at a control node." They found one at the next junction, a grimy panel that Pix's tentacles immediately began interfacing with. Marcus and Lenara positioned themselves as guards, the stolen pulse rifle feeling uncomfortably natural in Marcus's hands. "You're taking this rather well for a food critic," Lenara observed, her skin shifting through shades of midnight and starlight. "My profession requires adaptability," Marcus replied, keeping his voice low. "You'd be surprised how many chefs take offense to negative reviews. Though I admit, this situation might warrant a strongly worded critique." A ghost of a smile crossed Lenara's features. "Just 1 star out of 5? For ambience alone." The service was absolutely murderous. Their banter was interrupted by a triumphant burble from Pix. The tunnels suddenly resonated with the sound of rushing liquid, and distant shouts of alarm indicated their pursuers were getting an unexpected shower. But they couldn't celebrate yet. The diversion would buy them time, but they needed a permanent solution. Marcus activated his critic's datapad, relieved to find it still functioning. I have contacts in the media syndicate. If we can get proof of what's happening at the astral plate, they'll bury it, Lenara said grimly. The syndicate owns too many people. What we need is leverage. She hesitated, then added, during my time in their preparation facility, I saw things. Heard things. They're not just serving people, they're experimenting on them. Trying to enhance flavors through genetic modification. Marcus felt sick. That's why they were so interested in specific species. The crystal singer's regenerative abilities, my people's biological adaptability. Lenara's skin darkened with anger. They're creating living delicacies that can be harvested indefinitely. A new sound echoed through the tunnels, the heavy tread of combat mechs. The syndicate was escalating their response. They needed to move, but where? Marcus studied his datapad's map of the sector. There's a data center 3 levels down. All the high-end restaurants in this sector process their transactions through it. If we can access their records, we'd have proof of who's dining on sentient beings, Lenara finished. Names, dates, preferences. Her skin rippled with predatory patterns. Blackmail material. I prefer to think of it as investigative criticism, Marcus corrected diplomatically. He turned to the group. The center will have medical facilities. We can get everyone treatment while we gather evidence. The decision was made for them as energy blasts began cutting through the tunnel walls. The combat mechs were getting closer, their targeting systems likely able to detect them through the infrastructure. They moved as quickly as they could, helping the weaker members of their group. The young crystal singer had to be carried, their crystalline form growing dimmer with exhaustion. Marcus found himself working in seamless coordination with Lenara, as if they'd been partners for years instead of hours. The data center's maintenance entrance was protected by security systems, but Pixa's tentacles made short work of them. They emerged into a sterile white corridor, blessedly clean after the tunnels. We need to split up, Lenara said as they heard the mechs approaching. Get these people to the medical bay. I'll go with Marcus to find the evidence. The words were barely out of her mouth when the corridor's security shutters began closing. Someone had detected their presence. They had seconds to decide. Go. Marcus pushed the group toward the medical bay access. We'll find another way out. The shutters slammed down, separating them from the others. Marcus and Lenara were alone, trapped between the approaching mechs and whatever security forces the data center might deploy. Well, Lenara's skin shimmered with what might have been either anxiety or excitement. Shall we go review some dinner reservations? Marcus checked the charge on his pulse rifle. Indeed. Though I should warn you, my standards are quite exacting. They moved deeper into the facility, both knowing that their next steps would determine not just their survival, but the fate of everyone they'd rescued. The syndicate's operation had to be exposed, no matter the cost. And somewhere above them, in the gleaming towers of New Terra's upper city, Chef Vaxthal was undoubtedly preparing a very special menu for when they were caught. The data center's main processing hub hummed with the sound of quantum servers processing millions of transactions per second. Marcus and Lenara worked quickly at a terminal, her natural bioluminescence providing just enough light to work by. They disabled the main lighting to avoid detection. Your security credentials are impressive for a food critic, Lenara observed as Marcus's encrypted passkeys cut through yet another layer of protection. Her skin rippled with curious patterns. The restaurant industry can be competitive, Marcus replied, fingers dancing across the holographic interface. I once had to review a Martian fusion place that turned out to be a front for antimatter smuggling. After that, I invested in some additional skills. The terminal chimed softly as they accessed the astral plate's private servers. What they found made even Marcus's experienced stomach turn. The restaurant's client list included planetary governors, corporate executives, even a few names he recognized from Galactic Most Wanted lists. But it was the research data that proved truly horrifying. "They're not just serving people," Lenara whispered, her skin paling to a ghostly white. "They're using the restaurant as a cover for genetic experimentation. Look at these modification protocols." Marcus studied the files, his critic's eye noting the terrible attention to detail. "They're trying to create the perfect living delicacy. Species that can be harvested repeatedly, their genetic structures modified to enhance flavor and regeneration." "My people were just the beginning," Lenara's voice hardened. "They were planning to expand, to open similar establishments across the galaxy. Each one a front for their experiments." A new file caught Marcus's attention, financial records showing transfers to various government officials. "They've bought protection at every level. Even if we expose this, they might still." The lights suddenly blazed to full intensity. A slow clapping echoed through the server room. "Bravo," a familiar voice said. "I must say, Mr. Thorne, your investigative skills exceed your reputation." Chef Vaxthal emerged from behind a bank of servers, their crystalline form now encased in combat armor. They were flanked by security drones and what appeared to be custom combat mechs designed to look like elegant serving staff. "Though I'm disappointed," the chef continued. "We could have offered you so much more than mere truth. Imagine, your own establishment, your own special menu." The critics would have raved. "I prefer to maintain certain standards," Marcus replied, carefully positioning himself between Lenara and the nearest enemies. "Ethical sourcing of ingredients, for instance." Vaxthal's crystalline form pulsed with amusement. "Ethics? In this galaxy? Look around you, critic. The wealthy will always crave what's forbidden. We simply provide a service, wrapped in luxury and discretion." Along with a side of genetic experimentation, Lenara spat, her skin flashing with patterns of rage. "Necessary research," Vaxthal waved a crystalline appendage dismissively. "The galaxy's elite demand perfection. We simply ensure our offerings meet their exacting standards." Marcus felt Lenara press something into his hand, a data crystal. She must have downloaded the evidence while he kept Vaxthal talking. Now they just had to survive long enough to use it. "Speaking of standards," Marcus said, falling into his professional review tone, "I simply must point out some issues with your presentation." He took a deliberate step forward, drawing attention. "The lighting in your main dining room, for instance. Completely wrong for appreciating the crystalline structure of your specialized dishes." Vaxthal's form shifted with interest despite themselves. "Oh. Indeed. The angle of illumination should be at least 40 degrees offset to properly highlight the refraction patterns. And your wine list? Painfully conventional. Though I suppose that's to be expected, given your limited perspective." The chef's crystalline surface crackled with anger. "Limited? I have created experiences beyond your primitive imagination. My methods may be unconventional, but my results are derivative at best," Marcus interrupted, noting how the security drones had shifted slightly, their attention drawn by their master's agitation. Any sophistant with a basic grasp of molecular gastronomy could achieve similar effects without resorting to such crude methods. Vaxthal vibrated with rage. "Crude? I will show you the true meaning of culinary art. Seize them. I will prepare them myself, as a demonstration of." The chef's tirade was cut short as Lenara launched herself forward, her opalescent form shifting to mirror the server room's surfaces. The security drone's targeting systems, confused by her chameleonic abilities, began firing wildly. Marcus didn't waste the opportunity. He dove for cover, using his stolen pulse rifle to target the environmental controls. Superheated steam burst from ruptured coolant pipes, creating chaos in the confined space. "The evidence has already been transmitted," he shouted, though it was a bluff. "Your operation is finished, chef. Nothing is finished. Vaxthal's voice rose above the chaos. Do you think the Syndicate will allow such defiance? Even if you escape, there is nowhere in the galaxy. The chef's threat was interrupted by a massive explosion that rocked the facility. Emergency sirens began blaring as new voices joined the chaos, security forces, but not the Syndicate's. Actually, Marcus said, allowing himself a small smile, I took the liberty of arranging some additional reviews of your establishment. It seems several competing criminal organizations were quite interested in your client list. Through the steam and confusion, he caught glimpses of Lenara engaging the combat mechs in close quarters, her natural abilities making her nearly impossible to target. She moved with a deadly grace that made his pulse quicken for reasons entirely unrelated to their dangerous situation. But they weren't safe yet. Vaxthal was recovering, their crystalline form beginning to pulse with dangerous energy. The chef's outer layers were cracking, revealing something underneath that looked decidedly more weapon than culinary tool. If I am to fall, the chef's voice had taken on a resonant, inhuman quality, you will all become part of my final masterpiece. Marcus and Lenara exchanged glances through the chaos. Whatever Vaxthal was transforming into, they'd need to work together to survive it. And somehow, despite everything, Marcus found himself thinking this might be the most exciting review he'd ever written. If they lived long enough to publish it. The data center's emergency lighting bathed everything in a blood-red glow as Chef Vaxthal's transformation reached its horrifying conclusion. What had once been a Thessalian chef was now a crystalline monstrosity, their form grown to twice its original size, cooking implements merged with combat cybernetics in a grotesque display of culinary weaponry. You understand nothing of true gastronomy, Vaxthal's voice resonated through their crystalline body, sending waves of pain through Marcus's skull. Every dish must be perfected through sacrifice. Every flavor extracted through suffering. Actually, Marcus replied, diving behind a server bank as a spray of molecular-edged blades shredded the air where he'd been standing, I understand perfectly. You're compensating for a fundamental lack of creativity with excessive presentation. A common mistake among novice chefs. The taunt had its intended effect. Vaxthal roared, their crystalline form pulsing with rage-fueled energy as they charged Marcus's position. Which was exactly what Lenara had been waiting for. She dropped from the ceiling, her opalescent form having perfectly mimicked the environmental sensors above. As she fell, she drove a makeshift electromagnetic disruptor, crafted from stolen kitchen equipment, deep into Vaxthal's crystal matrix. The chef's form sparked and crackled, but didn't fall. Instead, crystalline tendrils whipped out, catching Lenara mid-air. Perhaps you'll be the garnish for my victory feast. I don't think so. Lenara's skin rippled with defiant patterns as she pressed something against Vaxthal's surface. I picked up some interesting techniques during my time in your kitchen. The sonic tenderizer she'd salvaged from the kitchen, designed to break down the toughest exotic meats, sent harmonic vibrations through Vaxthal's crystalline form. Cracks began appearing along their surface, but their grip on Lenara didn't loosen. Marcus didn't hesitate. He charged forward, his critic's eye identifying the stress points in Vaxthal's crystal structure. His pulse rifle might not do much damage normally, but with those cracks. Let me offer, he said, taking careful aim, my final review. The blast hit exactly where the harmonic vibrations had weakened Vaxthal's form. The chef's crystalline body shattered, releasing Lenara. But even as fragments of their form crashed to the ground, they began pulling themselves back together. You cannot destroy perfection, Vaxthal's voice echoed from a dozen crystal shards. The Syndicate will rebuild me. My methods will spread across the galaxy. About that, Marcus helped Lenara to her feet, noting how her skin shimmered with exhaustion. While we've been entertaining your monologue, the evidence of your operation has been broadcasting to every major news network in the sector. Including some rather interesting financial records. Lenara managed a tired smile. Amazing how quickly protected officials abandon ship when their accounts are frozen. The sound of heavy weapons fire echoed from above. The competing criminal organizations Marcus had tipped off were keeping the syndicate's reinforcements busy. But they didn't have much time. Your client list makes for particularly interesting reading, Marcus continued, watching as Vaxthal's fragments trembled with growing panic. I wonder how your wealthy patrons will react and they learn their genetic samples were being collected during their meals. For your research program? You wouldn't dare. Vaxthal's voice had lost its resonant power. The political implications. Already being discussed in emergency government sessions, Lenara cut in. Turns out even corrupt officials draw the line at being secretly experimented on. Marcus raised his pulse rifle as Vaxthal's fragments began trying to merge into a new form. Now, about that final review. The blast reduced the remaining crystals to powder, ending both Vaxthal's transformation and their culinary career permanently. In the sudden silence, Marcus and Lenara could hear the sounds of law enforcement finally breaching the upper levels. We should go, Lenara said, her skin rippling with concern. There will be questions, investigations. Actually, Marcus holstered his weapon. I think it's time to face the public. After all, he pulled out his critic's datapad. I have a review to write. Hours later, as dawn broke over New Terra's spires, Marcus sat in a quiet cafe, finishing his most important article yet. Lenara read over his shoulder, her skin shifting through gentle patterns of appreciation. While the astral plate's innovative approach to cuisine cannot be denied, she read aloud, their sourcing methods leave much to be desired. This critic cannot, in good conscience, recommend an establishment that confuses ethical boundaries with flavor boundaries. 0 stars. Too subtle? Marcus asked, enjoying how her natural bioluminescence complemented the morning light. Perfect, she smiled, her skin shimmering with what he was learning to recognize as affection. Though I hope your next review is less eventful. About that, Marcus saved his article and turned to her. I've been thinking of branching out. Perhaps a series on ethical xenogastronomy? I could use a partner with first-hand experience in alien cuisines. Someone who can handle themselves in unusual situations. Lenara's skin rippled with thoughtful patterns. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Thorne? I'm offering you an adventure, he replied. And perhaps, if you're interested, dinner? I know a lovely place that specializes in completely voluntary molecular gastronomy. Her laugh was like chimes in a soft breeze. Well, how could I refuse? After all, her skin shifted to mirror the colors of the sunrise. I should at least make sure your taste in restaurants improves. As they left the cafe together, Marcus reflected that while his review would certainly cause waves throughout the galaxy's culinary scene, he'd found something far more valuable than just another story. Sometimes the best meals, like the best partnerships, came from the most unexpected orders. And he had a feeling his future reviews would be anything but boring.